가게 도전에서 나와도 저 보면 담배 전에 된저 고담달라 차차로 야다 하다 우머지 지ተ에 되네 마 아니 지금 샌디 다천지 소리 원도르베 탑 되는 엘리트베 탑 아마 송샤바 디리다 산제베 추기 다 줍죠 미 가다 터도 남기지 고만토야 대토발에 아니 대외당상 균에 아니 스르는 서로 탑도 싫어기 람 리아 럽네 아니 산제고야지 하다 되게 그 중실들이 다만 남주한다 제양 크도 다 라링게네 다들 안 나서 고주야 생에디 빼나한다 제 지동이 나와 고매하기 그게 먼저 좀 버르디 양지 가서래 떠주고 남샤 잠에도 주체디 양 럽고야 주제샤 다디 약수지다 개수지디 아니 로벨랭댕 아니 오모니 부산지나라 세브샤요리 때 패지 대인알 요마르바 대인알 패지 요마리 오모니 부산지 요마르바 로벨랭댕 자상 패지 베나미스날 베나미스다 아들 코리안 게나 패지 요마리 요마르바 쉽게 봐요리 대인알 요리 쉽게 봐 자상하다 림베 그 우모니 부산지디 교가르샤 당연히 대안도 남산이 하면 비주산에 하다 로벨랭댕기 쉽게 봐 하다 대인알 여베체 인아다 코리안알 여베이나 디도스타고레 다디 간다 우멘다와 저디셔야다 우멘다와 근저진부디 지 규유아 전달이야兄弟 다오레 엔 다디 양라래야 아니 참매兄네 지금 송야도 저대야 가서 우리 보게 단도능이라 극주고 나샤게 참배 엔데는 마하진네 다 댄싱도 단도 저대 로도 상관을 줘래 다디네 장주고 섬다 고매알이야 다 가다 커진을 보는 시 동리가 나와 지구 산지 고만 토비하기 양구 차진데 성기가 말이 저서 동리가 나와디 태고 숨괴 장주고다 주기 버체 태고 숨괴 장주 지식 주인들전에 юм스전에 юм실 발치면서 송도가 싫어도 맞아 나왔어 다 파도 나와디 아니 장주고 차대요래 근데 장주고 있으면 양소를 발이야 아니 자월디 대에 자와 닝진도 좀 도디전에 송하는 신 자와 닝지 전부들도 와. 다 닝지 전부디 아니 겨울이야. 다 닝지 전부 써야지. 미국 선전 아니 동해에 선전을 민니 다 가다 지금 시시 직변 날에 아니 선전을 민니 대탐제 아니 시시 지고 타달래 자월 차고 냠배 되게 다 닝도지 걸래 인구여 봐. 그래서 되게 이르산에 대영월이야 강 아니 직변 날에 심전이야 지시 방법으로 주야 다 들어야 다신 주권을 주야 직다 명아 교도 되면권을 주야 직전이 현진식으로 도선 주는 거야 다 현주 되는 눈배 장은 창주 되는 눈배 계고 이외에는 창주 되는 영야 돼 안데 이게 되게 시작이 동리가 나와 되게 주 로체인 거야 다 대대 닝지디 영화래야 아다 지 가사 쪽디 동해 관계 나와 동해디 다 시거래 점점 되게 동해 시버를 차 송야디 또 두지 동해 송겨래 남자나래 두지 동해 이거네 가서 다 동해 송의 인생을 송야 되는 시리 누지기 동해 시고요. 자, 근데 이 인도산에 다 누지기 동해를 민들을 로용하게 야를 향고 견서 규진으로 찍디 다 동해지 동해 땅을 안 줘한다. 동해지 동해 민들보다 여하때 이내다 동해지 동해기 쭉 그렇게 이버티 찍신. 디 정보이나 다 지금 동해지 동해 민들을 여하때 저기 대 누지기 줄어 애니 봐. 민들을 놓겠네. 될 떠야지 용거보다 안 먼저 줘야게. 이게 최주로 세송샤다 들어와. 다 될래야 된지기다 간다지 디bun기주기 라래 선언을 내사야지 야우지 용알래야 아니 다 지르한테 되는 가서 우리 시안을 너무 미치야다 시안을 판다 생각이 그진들은 시 주로 삼으려고 투몽을 소리지 다 투몽 모임에다 자들이 이르잖아요 디bun기주를 초월해 배 디bun기주 간다 시안을 너무 미치야 시안을 판다야기 된지기다 지금 선언 걸래 모티베이션을 모티베이션 하는 중에서 배제 연구하래. 다 지금 이슈 최신에 지금 가지 최신에 셔바 남다도 돼야지 시야를 판다야 할람 배 지금 랑드 쪽으로 좀 현대 쪽으로 생각인데 용되기도 가. 사실이 이르잖아요. 된지기 지기다 소셜 보호를 써봐. 된지들보다 류질에다 나가를 해서 제디 몽구지 투모리 이질에도 몽구지 투모리 다 디디는 장랑게다 출루 가서 그래 그게 냠랭 콩을 양도야래야 아니 디 주사는다 소소 잠도 디다 생고로 와 저다 산제베 최소로래야 잠도 숨고 요리 자 진리인도다 랜데가 라래 산지가 초선돼야지 잠들었으면 고요비잖아요. 이거 잠로. 다 진리를 쳐 냠솔해야기 아니 지금 꿈을 영야리야 믿어고 거야. 다 아다 금들 믿어고 사지 믿어고 라파들이 지지치고 양그 넘친 해봐 봐. 아니 치외 내걸로 쳐마다고 생각하게 안 봐 봐. 디지 삼니 아니 가다 천딘 낭시에 떠야 봐. 다전에 진짜지다 냠솔해야기 다 그거 때다 다른 거 좀 밀려터도 다디 뭐냐라다 제 럽침부시 뚜뚜야기 그중에 럽차르디 자들이 이메이드잖아요. 다 단조고 삼야 도스전이 다 단조 전진이가 지원하다고 아니 년주동에 되네 장조 랜드 되네 도든 고연님이 삼아 군주 고연 주름 삼아 아니 코 땡강도 도와 아니 람강도 도와 사디리전이 다 로티드 림지 장과야지 저도와 다 로림지 장사다 릭디 니도 람림기 람 크도 도와배 신상지 깨기버도 뒷장냐리야 곰대배 있나 곰대는 줄 알아 지 배지 용서래 다 리지디 람림기 람용서 고차가시 와 에네 거 크도 미고디 상당히 미고디 장 이네 조조의 이게 전주선도 동력이 다 들려야 쇼로 조 대회이나 아니 지금 전주 선거 상으로 다 되게 다는 지금 전부 정보이나 단조 게 른당으로 되고 시행하시도 크도 지금 미국에 대해서 조사 되게 지금 시라사 디스게 심라리아 초 숙청을 하셔 마용해지 다 전주선도 동력이 다 되게 상으로 다는 뒤에 통일은 아직도 자고 땐 디기다 되게 검토해야래 다땐 디디지는 더 뭐주는 딱 간듯이 그래 사버지 로리아 자야도가 자들이 이러잖아고 르캬버를 때네 릭지거도 선라르지 릭지디 림베지는 라디 샴파셰 디 그게 곰지지 네 얘네 쪼쪼 디 짱짱으로 상당 맞아버시는 람용서 상당에 이기 잠지 장주로 돈이 다 드르해 상담다네 또 심베이나 아니 가다 장주 섬기 지 녀원니시 중베이나야 년줄람네 도지지 투리람네 저돌라 거심에 번전지 신수로 차서로서 송샤한테 인도 아다 기부 중요 거두기 지금 주제 뭐도 도야지 라베 털어 토트야 장주 섬기 지금 그래서 토도가 별로로 장 상무스 거래이나 투리남네 접돌라 거심에 번전지에 신수로 차서로서 송샤 들으셔도가 지금 도우사 들으시 심부시 거야셔 양은 조직 카셰 다 신이들도 당장에 배시우 공부 시세 다 되게야 거야지 사실 전부라야 용모 들었으면 돼 그래서 용모습을 말다 봐 변 신이들 주기 신이들 배패 아니 된줄로베님이 나때 배패 마대베님이 된줄로베님이 사들제 야구 상무가 다가는 지금 단조과 자샤네 지 자호 산지의 처리야 이지지다 그게 텔레야 아니 가서 우리 시에 대바 도와주면은 가고로 봐. 그다음 라마 산지 이부 도시 상게 시어서네. 다 롱을 된 것도. 그래서 뭔지 하면 신고가 누구 알아. 저 롱을 된 것도. 자 들이 이르자네 다 가다 장주선 돈이 다와 시에 이르자네 신도 고주 자름도 봐. 신고도 롱을 된 거 하스게도 봐. 공만에 자네게 상당 제가 제외이나. 또 소소 구부 우주세네. 또 제주성 평일 통계 나랑 진짜 야 교수 인생다 소 구부수선 루교레마다 시 가져전 봐. 제주성 평일지 주요나 소소저 랑 진짜 견 현진지 견의 지송이잖아요. 랑 진짜 가져 봐. 그다 롱되고 말어. 그 리버랑 좀 줘야 봐. 다가는 동이 있다. 리버랑 거 하는 거 주인 거 알아. 자상가 지인다 온분놈을 기다로 배진지 양거 드리게서 저번에 네가 알아? 얘네 지금 신랑 그 찾아서서 망고 지금 통대게 지속도 안 거든데 지금 알려 주잖아요. 지금 또 리베트 지금 터네 서로 구조돼야지 상담 하면도 롱을 때네 지금 라싱인데 배직하고 그래. 다이네 소소 감담 봐봐야 맨라고 물어봐. 죄송아. 어도스네. 다 도마 지금 신이 된지 또 라마 진상을 거래 라마 명 토서지 저기야 말이 지금 신이 진상지 다 지송 된지 때는다 로가지 다 신이 진상을 돼 너디양나는 소야게 신이 투어시오 녀시오 연달하고 전절롱기주 되니 로도 돌아 마켓에 제외더니 교방의 댄싱에 출주된 거야 돼 백해천 보리 장아주 배배지도 나라리아 라마 주구슬나 즉사하신 것이 캠보드 기시슬로네 샤나게 매들 소리도 돼 아주 최 시세 매백에 배제래샤 저는 라마의 측에서 타연되어 자셔서 지도네 아니 저 말이 내만가디 탈렌의 침백도리아 탈렌이 부터다서야지 디지 아주 결론지 다 그런 개발사 전부리샤 냠르버리샤 전에는 공기 쇼스된 것이 레서 공화 탈렌한 자니 숨실레리 다 사직은 공간의 쇼스들 레서 제 공쇼스 지금 낭사로 시도했도 근데 공기 숨주 낭사 레사 신나디 기대 도치 통계로도 도도도지 지도 공디간 쇼제 얘는 수준는 거르사 내 섬날 아주 좀 전에 되는 게 길이 섬찬스 섬날이야 당 아주 배워라마 개주실 시제 이니 쉬우지 배 얘는 나시다 이니 지 별이야 그래서 배워지 배 타바체제 이니 세기티 시티세서요래 쉬고 생두 라베체리 모저도 세기티 따고 있으니 막 베징지 오래서 자사가 세기티 간을 땡에디 비죽해버린데 자사들이 가서디 쉬우지 지금 시대인데 배다가서래 싸우나 부도다살이야 쉬우지가 일하게서 왔다 들으지 거래 삼바르지 뭐는 전에 배드 차당 리주 된듯이 단 도즈 된듯이 타네 아니 하다 지금 파원 도도도 더더 더를 써야 돼 도도르스도 어디 렐리지 거디 어디 가는 수는 거를 써 저도 되는 거 아래 아주 별이 앞에나다 디 준주부터 때배다 오래 디 자페주 엔 공차잖아 누구 남체 로스페팅이지 각 텐데기 라진 변진기 냐므로 그렇게 매워져도가 뭐는 전에도 저 하려버리 하지를 거래 근데 지금 매를 차잖아 뭐는 전에 그 주변 견생생이지 왜 방구 소리 쉬고 하다 와야 자들이 인도전에 라마 굉장히 연대 상하지 과를 마도 칠로를 지금 다자고로 지듯이 치토벽 가는 게 빈가 말이 공상가버 침을 퍼진로 상공제 나라 벌급 측시지 뒤송요래 뭐도 좀 쉬고데 진상 식바 겸배 제대로 표현이 강스 진상선이 부구제 얘는 부구 식바 건데지 얘는 지간 대등에 도스 무슨 거 진상 식바 겸배 표현이 강스 디자가送的 어디에 이르잖아요. 다 가다 라마 생이 상하고 와래. 디다서 해고 시. 어다 누구세네. 로단직. 다야 어떤 게 자동. 한 잘 줄이. 잘 있어서.
공다소양 비례저 존기덕경정결런공 방심이가 담덩이종 정사양약 위료현고 위성도 원수 자시
So, with regard to this text, Precious Garland by Master Nagarjuna, what it shows is that as our goal is the ultimate goal is the reaching omniscient state or Buddhahood. Therefore, in order to reach that goal, to journey on the path, it shows that how we should actually engage ourselves in the practices over from lifetime to lifetime, and then tread along the path that culminates into omniscience. And then when it comes to really applying these teachings in practice, first what we need to do is it's important for us to study various philosophical texts as well. And the best and the most extensive philosophical text for studying different philosophies, that were extant in India in those days. For example, within the Buddhist context, one of the texts written by these two texts, which were written by Bhaviveka, are very important to study, which are the Madhyamaka Hridaya, the heart essence of the middle way, and its commentary by which is the Blades of Reasoning. And so these two texts must be studied to understand the various philosophical traditions and thoughts that were extant in India in those days, and then that spread in India. And regarding these two texts, it seems that there is no Chinese translation, which means that these may not also be there in Korean translation. But we need also to say, in that case, in order to understand the Madhyamaka philosophy well, it would be important to study the 400 verses by Master Aryadeva. And So since this text is in Sanskrit, in Chinese, and maybe also in the Korean language, you should study this to understand the Madhyamaka view, the middle way view of emptiness. And then when you study about Madhyamaka philosophy, when it comes to studying about emptiness, selflessness, and so forth, you also need to learn the logic and reasoning which are used to prove the truth about emptiness. And also you should be able to study about what are known as the negative phenomena and negations, and then positive phenomena and so forth, which come along within the study of the emptiness and Madhyamaka philosophy, and also the logic and epistemology. And then, therefore, at least you should have some rough idea or understanding of these topics as well. And then, in order to reach Buddhahood, omniscient state, what we must also cultivate is not just the understanding of emptiness, but also bodhicitta. And therefore, it is important also to study how what is bodhicitta, how do we cultivate it, and so forth, because not view of emptiness, understanding and insight into emptiness alone will not lead us to omniscient state, but we need bodhicitta together with it. And so, with regard to bodhicitta, when you in the process of cultivating bodhicitta, what you should understand is that you should cultivate compassion, because Nagarjuna says its root is compassion, and therefore one should have, in order for us to have this courage and the resolve, the determination to liberate all sentient beings, we should also know how sentient beings, from the freedom from the two extremes of samsara as well as the extreme called peace of nirvana. We should all cultivate compassion towards other sentient beings. And therefore, with regard to compassion, of course, with regard to bodhicitta first, what we are thinking about is bringing about benefit to sentient beings, in other words, helping sentient beings. And then for that, we have the practice of the equaling and exchanging self and others in the case of bodhicitta. And then in order to understand the possibility that there is a possibility for enlightenment for us, we should also study emptiness and about emptiness. And therefore, now when it comes to cultivating compassion, one should also think about the suffering nature of sentient beings, because this compassion is that wish or the determination for the determination to liberate or free other sentient beings from suffering, and you have that wish or aspiration. As therefore, it is important to know what suffering itself is, and within the context of the teaching of the Buddha, as the Buddha says during the first sermon, the teaching on the Four Noble Truths, know the suffering. And therefore, we must be aware and we must know what suffering means. Here, mainly, it refers to, when Buddha points out to us to know suffering, he's pointing to the conditioned existential pervasive suffering. In other words, the samsaric suffering as a whole, which is the result of our delusions and karma. And in order to do that, of course, when we also need to think about the other types of suffering, such as the obvious painful experiences that we know as suffering, which is called suffering is suffering. And the more you wish to think about it, and the more you wish to be free from it, you would also put effort to overcome it as well. And therefore, in order to do that, what we should think is that if we want to overcome suffering of suffering, we also need to cultivate virtues or virtuous actions, the 10 virtuous actions, and avoid the negative actions. And these, of course, with regard to these practices, there are something which are common to also other religious traditions. I know many friends from other traditions, such as Christians and Muslims and so forth, who are more than dedicated to their own people, the people on their own side. They are dedicated to work for others. And And therefore, this is common to all the religious traditions, I think. And so now, when we do this practice or cultivation of the 10 virtuous actions, and we can do this within the parameter of each religion. And for example, we can do this within the practice context of Christianity or Islam or any other religious traditions. And then when you do that by taking, for example, what comes in here is the element of taking refuge. Element of taking refuge in whatever God the particular respective practitioners or followers believe in. They put their complete trust in those gods and the Creator or whatever, and then do these practices. These practices become either Christian or Muslim practice and so forth. Now, in order for us to do these practices well, to inspire us and encourage us to do this practice well, we also need to think about the impermanent nature of this kind of life that we have. And we are not going to death. Death is certain, and that the time when we will die is uncertain. And whereas what helps after our death is the understanding and the knowledge and the virtuous practices of Dharma that we have done. And so we should think about the impermanent nature of this life and our own impermanence, and then to inspire us, spur us on the practice of the 10 virtuous actions and avoid 10 non-virtuous actions. And so, and then having met with the Dharma in this life, one should also think that this life that we have is also something which is precious, and one should also feel honored or glad that we have met with the Dharma. And in order to do this practice of the Dharma, we should also make this life a meaningful one, so that so for that we should also think about the preciousness of this life, how difficult it is to find such a life where you have the opportunity and all the facilities to do the practice of the Dharma. And therefore we should think about the 18 different qualities of this life, the leisure and endowment. And then also we should think about the practice of avoiding the practice of the 10 virtuous actions, and then think about karma and then next life and so forth, so that we are more inspired to do the practices well. And so sometimes there are when it comes to doing these practices within the context of Lamrim, the stages of the path to enlightenment, you may study the Lamrim as a whole, step by step, and then focus on each practice, like practicing or focusing on the taking the relying on the Guru, and then also about impermanence, and then the preciousness and the rarity of finding this kind of life, and then the working of cause and effect, and the next the fortunate realms and unfortunate realms that we are going to be reborn, and so forth and so on. And you can focus on each of these practices and for some time. But on the other hand, we can also do study or the entire structure of Lamrim. And when it really comes to do the practice, for certain individuals, it may be more effective if they focus on the practice of cultivation of the bodhicitta and the understanding of emptiness. Because when you actually do these practices, you really find, and when you really feel the preciousness of these practices, what you will also feel is you feel inspired to really take seriously this life and see the preciousness of this human life that we have found as well. And then that in turn pushes you further to do the meditation on the other topics more intensely. And therefore, depending on individuals, there are some people who can do the practices, focusing on particular points of practice within the Lamrim, whereas for others it would be more effective to do this kind of practice, but mainly focusing on bodhicitta and emptiness, because these really inspire you to do the rest of the practices more seriously. And therefore, one should cultivate bodhicitta based on compassion, thinking about the suffering nature of sentient beings, and then develop bodhicitta within yourself. And so with regard to bodhicitta, it is said by Master Maitreya that it is that factor which actually shuns or avoids or stops you from being reborn in the lower realms. It is that path which shows you the path which shows you the higher rebirth, and then it is that state, that factor which leads you to, or which reveals you the immortal state, which is Buddhahood. And therefore I pay homage to bodhicitta. And then, of course, having made your bodhicitta and the practice of emptiness your main practices, and within the context of Lamrim, of course, and when it comes to talking about the reliance on Guru, one should also know that in the Lamrim text it is said that the Buddha must be, the Lama or your Guru or teacher must be seen as a Buddha. But then, in order to be able to do that, we should also be able to see what is the benefit of relying on a Guru, and the different topics that are taught in the Lamrim, such as the disadvantage of not being able to rely on a Guru, and then the disadvantage of relying wrong sort of way of relying on Guru, and so forth. And so when you do these practices within the context of Lamrim, it is said that you should see the Lama as a Guru. But for us, that becomes a very obscure kind of topic, or for us, very, very, very hidden topic, because it's very difficult for us right from the beginning to see the Lama as a Guru. And therefore, rather than just stubbornly sort of, so to say, emphasizing or stubbornly persisting on these topics, saying that the Lama should be seen as a Guru, and then doing meditation without really understanding the whole structure of the Buddha, teaching of the Buddha, it would have not much effect. And therefore, rather than doing this, it would be better to use reasoning to prove that bodhicitta, the practice of bodhicitta, is something that is real and that has a real effect in us. Because when you do the bodhicitta practices, what you can do is what you should do is think of within the context of equalizing and exchanging self and others. You have to see the disadvantages or the faults of self-cherishing, the extreme selfishness, and then the good qualities, positive qualities of cherishing other sentient beings more than oneself. And so when you think along these lines of why we should not cherish oneself alone, but cherish others more than oneself, and so forth, you will see the reason why you should actually cultivate bodhicitta. And therefore, this is really based on reason and not, it can be verified from your own experience and reason that it's more effective and better to cherish others more than oneself, and therefore you don't need necessarily to resort to scriptural authority as such for this kind of practice. And therefore it makes sense even in day-to-day life for us when we deal with others. When you are kind and compassionate towards others, it has better effect for yourself and others. And so through these one can reason out that cherishing others is more important than cherishing oneself, and therefore based on this, of course, you can carry on with the cultivation of bodhicitta based on reason. And so that the teachings where the Lama is said to be has to be seen as a Buddha and so forth, slowly will make some kind of sense to you. And therefore we need to, by basing ourselves on reasoning to cultivate these principles of compassion, bodhicitta, then we can also see that the importance of the guru, relying on a guru for these practices as well. Therefore, when we have to rely on a guru, we also need a qualified teacher. And with regard to the qualifications of a qualified teacher, 10 qualifications are given in the Mahayana Sutra Alamkara by Maitreya. And so it says the guru should be someone who is disciplined, who is peaceful and thoroughly pacified. And then the guru must also have compassion towards sentient beings, untiring compassion. And then also that the guru must be more knowledgeable than the disciple, and these different qualities and understanding of emptiness and so forth are mentioned. And so without really understanding these, knowing these qualifications that must be seen in a guru, what happens otherwise is, as Tibetans usually do, without really knowing the qualifications of a lama, a tulku, for example, like a reincarnate lama, they immediately kind of bow down to them and put them up high on thrones. And on the other hand, real learned geishis, who are really good practitioners as well, they are kind of shunned, they are kind of ignored by these common people who have not much knowledge of the Dharma. But when I once visited Thailand, I found that I visited the monastery of Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, I think it's called Balarama Ashrama, something like that, and Balarama Wat. And when I visited there, I found the monastery to be a forest monastery. And then when the Buddhadasa Bhikkhu also took me to a spot where there was a small rock on which he sits and he used to sit and give teachings. And so when I saw that throne on which he sat, there's just a stone throne, it kind of reminded me, oh, this is how the Buddha also gave teachings, sitting on this kind of throne. And so there was it really, Buddhadasa Bhikkhu really inspired me. And whereas now in the Tibetan custom, for certain lamas, for example, before I fled Tibet, the people built a golden throne for me on which to sit and give teachings and so forth. But what happened was, in the end, I had to flee, whereas the person who was supposed to be sitting on it had to flee, whereas the golden throne was asked to be brought to China, to Beijing by Mao Zedong, because he wanted to see it, he said. And so the person who was supposed to be sitting on it could not use it much, but had to flee. And so when I think, in retrospect, when I think about this, I really feel admired towards the admiration towards Buddhadasa Bhikkhu. And then also we have other examples of such masters like Zapetu Rinpoche, who was a really highly learned as well as a well-accomplished master, but he lived a very simple life, like a mendicant. And similarly, it is the case with Jizun Milarepa, who was a king amongst all practitioners and accomplished masters of Tibet, but he lived like a beggar, a simple and mendicant life. And therefore, with regards to the Tibetan lamas, whom customarily the lamas are taken to be very high and so forth, the fifth Dalai Lama had said about Tibetan lamas that Tibet is filled with donkeys in disguise of wearing the leopard skin. And so this is the kind of situation that prevailed when people have not much knowledge about the Dharma, and therefore, it is very, very important for us to seek qualified teachers when we want to do Dharma practice.
제대로 그러한 그런 가치들을 모르기 때문에 그러한 풍토리들이 있는 것 같습니다. 제가 언제 한번 태국에 간 적이 있습니다. 타일랜드를 한 두세 차례 방문한 적이 있는데 그때 부타다사라는 비구 스님이 계셨습니다. 이분은 교학과 수행을 겸비한 아주 훌륭한 분이셨는데 그분의 거처에 방문한 적이 있습니다. 그분이 법문하는 곳에 제가 간 적이 있는데 그 법문하는 곳이 숲속이었고 숲속에 아주 평평한 큰 돌 위에서 자신이 법문을 하는 곳이라고 이렇게 소개를 했습니다. 그래서 그것을 보면서 생각하기에 옛날에 부처님께서도 이와 같이 법문을 하셨을 거다라는 생각이 들었습니다. 티베트에서는 라마라고 하면 굉장히 어떤 화려한 그런 면모들을 보이고 있습니다. 그래서 어쨌든 그분의 그런 숲속의 평평한 돌 위에서 법문을 하시는 모습에 굉장히 큰 환희심이 일었고 또한 수위 찬탄하는 마음이 생겼습니다. 티베트에서 있을 때 이제 달라이라마의 법상이라고 해서 금으로 만든 법상이 있었습니다. 금으로 만든 법상이 망명 오면서 마오쩌둥이 모택동이 금으로 만든 법상이 어떻게 생겼나 그래서 베이징으로 옮겨 간 적이 있었습니다. 그래서 어쨌든 태국의 타일랜드의 비구 스님을 보면서 정말 이러한 것들이 수행자로서 이러한 모습들이 면모들이 필요하다라는 생각이 들었습니다. 필요하다고 생각을 합니다. 이팽론의 법의 어떤 계승자인 주체자인 자베트 림포체께서도 아무것도 가지지 않는 그런 소박한 스승이었습니다. 그런 라마의 유명한 이름을 가지고 있지 않으신 분이었습니다. 그리고 밀라레빠 역시도 그런 수행자 정말 거지처럼 그렇게 지낸 어떤 수행자였습니다. 그래서 중요한 것은 실질적인 스승이 가지고 있는 어떤 덕이 중요한 것이지 높은 법상 이러한 것은 큰 의미가 없다라고 생각합니다. 5대 달라이라마께서도 그런 말씀을 하셨습니다. 아무것도 지식이 없는 그런 사람이 법상에 앉은 것은 당나귀가 아주 비단 법의를 입고 법상에 앉은 거와 마찬가지다라고 그렇게 말씀하신 적이 있습니다.
야다. 나 그래도 내 최신의 전에 소소소소 샴지슝을 소시도게.
Do you find that when I give teachings like this and when I talk about Tibetans, criticizing Tibetan society, do you find me self-criticizing or like disgracing the Tibetans ourselves?
내 자신에게 좋지 않은 얘기, 망신스러운 얘기를 하는 거 아니냐고 그렇게 묻으시는데요.
견마통은 아니 요드야 상고마로. 견통은 단땡아 좀 주고 싶다는 것은 땡그로.
So if we don't see our own faults, then we will not have the wish to make changes. But if we see them, then we'll also want to.
假设性格吧，或者被空气不正这个건가를 Garland Tibet 가서 땡 남살이야스 응아드는 방배 레마도 거신처럼 건가 말이야.
So when I was in Tibet, for example, we have a custom for the High Lamas to, make the shirt, and put some linings with very expensive brocades on the shirt, where there is the yellow patch. But after coming into exile, I completely gave that up, and I started wearing a very simple fabric called a shirt made from simple cloth, and use those expensive brocades for the images or the statues of the Buddha. So of course the Buddha himself perhaps could wear those expensive brocades.
아니 산지 좀 된데 김하고 로드 중에 제래야 루주까지 제도가 등아도 상당 거래 좀 된데 그런 뒤에 된다고 거네 아니 루주 가전제는 뭐 저거 상기변 제가 저러. 나도 라라고 있다로 상기학 상담 논주.
So, if we look at the life of the Buddha, Shakyamuni himself, he went through the 6-year practice of austerity. So why did he do that? Of course, we have to really think about it. He actually went through those austere practices in order to help us. And therefore, if he had to do so, then go through such hardships, I mean, we cannot, it's wrong for us to think that we can achieve our goals without much effort. So I think that it won't be of. I would just finish the first chapter this time. I don't think it's good to try to finish the whole text. Since the Korean group here has some connection with Avalokiteshvara, they do recite the praise and the mantra of Avalokiteshvara. I think that I would do a simple blessing of the four-handed Chandrasik or Avalokiteshvara, although there are many different aspects of Avalokiteshvara, but I would do a blessing or Jenang of the four-hand Avalokiteshvara, which is short.
Any Chandrasik ada Risha Jena did the Jeni Membesim Giada Jutu Suya Chikinda.
With this four-hand Chandrasik blessing, I will also do we'll also go through the ceremony for bodhicitta as well as bodhisattva vows.
Oh yeah.
First, we'll complete the first chapter. Chapter 1. We are at verse number 78 now.
Nemi jigbe manyamba ose. That ne kibu sami chumai meme lume nakame. Namshimai kumena teleshina kibu kang seni. That digi kata kansa dame da chiji dame niga lo sokutwa. Dame nibuti. Dame nibuti umaba ane 타녀도 ranzi shenge umabe ane kansa dame chiji dame charashabare. Da anda 타녀도 ranzi mishibe umabe ane kansa dame chiji dame de 동시 최신의 개발샤마도 다민이를 찾아야 말이지. 다민되는 저 남들치 최다 강사 예외 남니 송신이 우모지고는 뒤송도와. 자다 안데디 자시로한테 이 달에 가서 친송아 자시로人家 달에 아니 풍부 때문에 떠고 그랬어. 지지 풍부 중에 뭐 디지털은 건지 송샤티디 전에 다 풍부 때문에 마도나 가사 근데 다음에 친상 또 말이지. 그 송송아. 다데 아니 강사 다음에다 저기 다음에 고민할 때 뒤송샤데. 기본 강사 써야 돼. 아니 사초 멜롱 나가 남시 스타디 나가 수준에 들이 부가 나가 써야 돼. 류인 난게 대 동시에 연구로 봐. 저장 어딘데 인도 사초 멜롱 나가 남시 수준에 감주시 기부사데 컴주 뒤에 아니 풍봉하는 때는 다시 봐주세요. 풍봉하는 때는 장안 주변에 나가 봐도서는 나대 유스로다. 근데 나 그게 유스 말하다. 나대도 스로. 그래서 가다 풍부 나한테는 다 나대 샤고 그러다. 그래서 다디 상로 봤다 보이나? 아니 수기 차디디 나르베 말에 추감데 수기 루비 랜디 루비 사회적 저봐 디사체 랜디적 저봐 디추체 최적적 저봐 디매체 요의적 디디 룸체 아니 난게는 지금在북에서在북으로 서고 된这个북어 디디 난가체 되네 남시체 어다 감추 딱 감추부터가 안에 나스가래 딱 감추부 리네 에네 사디 나르베 상고된 나르베 충급된 나르베 명감 나르베서는 견인이합니다. 단념 나보산지버랑가 나를 차샤네 배나 로빌랭데 차샤네 에네 이기 나버셔발라 간사가 타네 에네 도보인선네 간사가 천시 안주는 그 퍼징슈 나라를 천시 이기 남시신 세대하다디 셰기에 있잖아요. 셰백 때문에 나한테 셰기였다. 나 디디 탐절로 에네 최강다 가인네 그 전지 때문에 지금 요구그리스 전지 뭐는 지금 요구그리스 민두니스 셰베 민주세 전지 뭐는 요구그리스 아다 디게스 들어다. 자 디디 인도다 나지 전지 뭐는 요구를 풍부 나나네 나지 요구그리 아니 수 가서 저기 사슈 멜로디디다 그 세미 뱀부르시 근데 이두잖아 나샤서 됐다 남시가나 맞도 민두스 다 남시야 먹고지에 인두잖아 아니 제시기 남시신 소용도 다 민고왕기 여버지 쇼트나 다 드디셔가 민두가 자다 타녀도 장전 미시바 간다 전경면에 매바 민두니스체 전 매바 말이 민죽제 시지 여래 민두니 여래 민두니 여래디 또 민삼십에 삼제 민민베 전 여배 잡아 말이스 사다들이 인도산에 민삼세되기 민민베 전지도 여래디네 전지 가래슬나 다 견샤면 되지 모니기 못 주지 근데 인도 민주세 전디 민교 왕기 여버지마다 저 여버리사지 또가 저또 가서 다들 침을 봐. 근데 인도산에 또 이진 남식이 때문에 가셔야 말이스. 다 이진 남식을 잘하셔봐이나. 배로 차잖아. 또 나가 중내 소야도 또 되는 상황이 담이나. 세두기 이진 남식도 와. 밀은 거 내고 그 이진 남식도 와. 니 투부코에 내고 그 이진 남식도 와. 또 더도 봐봐 맞춘 거이나. 이루 라보디 바바바 파팀 뭐 가서 그랬지 중성주 이루 라보디 바바 파팀 이루 참여관 레벨거도 따디 땅아 디마도 넣으면 돼. 따디 나 샤오스는 되잖아요 말이. 나이 웨세스 자 러버로. 자 웨세티 수리스로는 나이 리소로다. 저는 웨세티를 로스 아직 시작부터. 저는 웨세고는 나 샤오스는 되면 돼. 아니 난 가서 봐봐. 난문도 주변에 내가 나 바라셔 내가 서 통말. 다 예르여는 왜세들이 통모도 담아면 되네. 통담에 상관이 송샤다 디강 상다고. 리디 띵아 샤오선 되어지는 거. 선다 둘산에 다 맞춰내 믿으잖아요. 다 팬이 지기야래. 얘는 야래. 다나 민고왕이 여봐. 근데 왜 매지 줍사야 되더라고. 아니 젊으시 사실적인 나라리였다. 다 뒤 야고 상담 담시 처하게도 다 디옥션들이 무슨 거라도 다 배자 걸어도 같은데 제가 젊으시 그런 처음에 나 상도 처음에 나라리야 아니 사무 오면식으로 장거죠. 교육롱 정신 매발라 균제 땡땡적과 까매장 단저 우매롱의 이유는 되게 마음에서 때는 제 세송도가 다전에 리신이면 나리야 아니 민두니 수치에 전경면에 주버지 매번 인도잖아. 다 민국 관계 여봐 의미진 주보스 송도가. 다 뒤주고 자식적인 자요. 다 자식적인 게 라지 당구 죽동도 나올 때 송도가 유준이를 만들었어. 유준가만 리그에 내가 인도잖아. 다 유주치말에 매년 놀러 대쳐서 창을 차고 송도가. 다 뒤주고 자식에 오모 공부를 나올이야. 아니 우메다에 탈투베 가상한 니니토스 송샤다 되르샤. 세상에 민자 다유점 세야디 다 가다 뇽도네 각자 창문에 캐고지 주나. 그래서 다외 정시 공단을 무식 써야지. 다외 정시 제외실 많이 봐야 캐교라. 많이 덕시 고면배 제기 민소 항말 통스. 민습돼야 자식은 녀민녀의 주의 전투경영 나도군 세네다 전배 접어 남아다 신 송샤다 돼. 누가 저다 동시는 그 뇽토네 각자 창문에 캐괴 쉬더라 애니 민장 다유 점시 올라샤돼야지. 되지 요야지 예버리. 그래서 대한테 계속 계산자주 안다 송나 들으시도가 그러면 나올이야. 애니 나온 때디 잡으신데 뜻이 잡으신데 나올이야. 애니 나와서 소주의 신도는 시스템에 니주기 서스통 루지규메 때문에 다나다. 내가 뭐냐 뚱리지 못돼 신의 송샤디. 각자 캐괴 양용으로 전부 주문이나 다도 동인 때이잖아. 치수소이네다 치수로서이네다 난게 뒤두고 영화이네다 즉 하다 가인이 된정면에 여봐지 나온 것도 가. 자자가 나와서 소주의 신도나 시스차왔다 심이 짜져야지. 저 조정이 중나로 심이 짜져야지. 송도가. 그래서 두주지미 대변님의 아니 심이 짜져 시에 되는데 이니 그래서 빈주기 슝을 때네 아니 타쳐버시 생고래 세트 송도가. 조심해서 차샤네. 다들 송도가. 자들 이두잖아요. 아니 자기도 차샤네. 지금미래 롬니난 중심을 시야 말했대. 단다 님부디리 자도 배지들이 benja 나로바 아니 날린데 개발봐. 루루잖아. 나와져버지라도. 그래서 슝리도 시요. 슝리도 시니 수 덤견이 다 냠용도 되니 아니 말바다. 말바마소. 다가는지 제미집에 말바라데. 다 되는마 인다 말미 다솜신의 그 중간 데려. 다 지금미래 다 지금미래 다 되는마 가서 말베다 메시지 도치네. 그래서 공기 책용요제디 단다 십시도가 단담 때문에 원도니 개회상제 니자메 추구서다 람다메 시로서야디디 다 디간릭도 다 단담리야 특성 공속 리시를 단담도 집에 단담 찍다 가서를 단담도 집에 단담 찍시는 예발에 아다 금지서야디 추구서다 람다메 사디 찍지마 제윤데 가서를 단담 집에 단담들도 대원도 저는 산재야만 선재야만 내버징야만 내세요 가게야만 송샤디 다살리도 상태들이 인도잖아요. 애니 배사자버 자신의 뜻이시죠. 그 생각이셔야들이 미신부치게 내주 가가리 기록을 나는 자신이 아다 디 가서 변화도 공상가 버치면 디 송야리 구금 최주저에 라회시 정리 땜바증의 체력이 밤에 롱도 도배 캐노서 남인 꿈부셔야 낙동 망세니 르르 잡으셔로 프로세스 송도와 샤무스부가 레로가 기루이 샤무스부가 레로버제데 모더랑 게 밤이 롱도기베 뭐냐 전에기베 제가서 그래 지금 노르 캐노로 디디 아니 샤토나메체 남인 꿈부셔야 낙동 망스 장저르베 도지 다다랑에 로산 것이 수도 딘주소 달라셔네 나와 링링의 장소샤는 고주라전시 소환능데 직접 아마의 신세되나 라라 링링의 여개면도 내가 뭐비 셰셰마나 아마 개모도 저도도 고선 송샤도 차디 다 타녀도의 장세 가인도잖아요. 다 하고 사요라고 민대 민점 다장도 여봐서야지 당연히 흉내 송샤버 되기 타네 로테 초소 장 아니 갈래 봐도 kum지 때는 집에이나 아니 가정선의 용도네 아니 민자 다유 좀 해야지 그 샤트야지 못 해야지 또 영사리 사티데 인주잖아요. 어디 들이 저서 남심마인 꾸미나스 저 초바디에 말이스 텔레션의 기부강스 텔레 로스 전신도 기부강사 영식 말이스 진짜 인도 어느 기부 때문에 매발을 bes려나 말이 기부 컨트롤 뇌배치 전 기부 컨트롤 뇌벌 때문에 답을했어. 어다 우먼주가 나려야 가사 남바 둥긴 룹준 매매기 남제 매벌은 직된 일에 늘 랑게 연락 때는 도고인스 직된 타녀도 아니 랑게 연락을 때네 딱 between 참아시기 메뉴버 대섬식이 예배 요구처네 딱 이것이 그래서 들으셔 기부 큰룬 뇌배치 뇌벌 때는 주버리스 진짜 인도 샹의 때는 주버리 뭐 주요 말이 진짜 인도 양다와 모니기 뭐 주버리스 양다 모인스 제다와 다 저기라면다 저기라면 대신 서주 메론로 속에 캄니 제양 듀치스 도만 듀베다 타르에네 민데 샤과 쌈그 네니 샤과 쌈식 터네다 서주로 속에 디셔규를 모두 야마리스 된데인데 듀치스 대다장 양단이도 민스 다제 내셔 샤리샤
어제 그 77번까지 하셨는데 78번, 79번이
So we're on verse number 80.
여기서는 인간은 흙도 아니고 물이 아니며 불도 아니고 바람도 아니네.
So
도 아니니 이 모든 것이 아니라면 그것과는
it is said by Master Chandrakirti that the selflessness is of two folds, which is selflessness of persons and selflessness of phenomena, which are taught by the Buddha. And with regard to the selflessness of these two selflessnesses, according to the Savatantrika Madhyamakas, who assert that things should have some objective existence, even in conventional terms, they say that the selflessness of a person is a grosser level of selflessness, and the selflessness of phenomena is subtler. Whereas the Prasangikas, who deny any objective existence whatsoever, say that there is no difference in terms of degree of subtlety between these two selflessnesses, but the difference of these two is only that the selflessness of persons is the selflessness which is established on the basis of a person, and the selflessness of phenomena based on other things like aggregates and so forth, other than a person. And so that's the difference, and therefore we have selflessness of persons and selflessness of phenomena. And these, of course, when it comes to talking about the two selflessnesses, these are meant for taught by the Buddha to liberate sentient beings. And so the Master Chandrakirti says that in order to liberate sentient beings, the two selflessnesses are taught, which are the selflessness of persons and phenomena. And so without understanding, so as we already covered yesterday, the other day, Master Nagarjuna says that without really getting at or understanding this, that the aggregates, the psychophysical aggregates, are empty of any intrinsic existence. There is no way we can actually gain a full understanding of selflessness of persons, and therefore, with regard to this understanding of the selflessness of persons, the selflessness of phenomena, now Mr. Nagarjuna goes through these in verse number 80 and 81. So verse number 80 says, if a person is neither earth, nor water, nor wind, nor space, nor fire, nor consciousness, nor all, then what is a person apart from this? And so what this shows is that when we go through these 6 constituent factors. The earth is, for example, within ourselves, we have the solid, the solidity, the nature of things in us, like the flesh and so forth, are the earth element, and then the fluidity are those of the fluids are the water elements, and then the heat is the fire element, and then the movement, things that move within us, which has some kind of called movement. Those are the wind element, and then the hollowness in our body is the space element, and then we have this experience aspect, which is the consciousness. And so these 6 elements make up a person. And when you ask, where are you, you would just point to yourself. I'm here, and you won't point somewhere else, saying talking about yourself. And so what we are made up of is these 6 constituent elements. But are these 6 elements, if you are asked, are each of these 6 elements yourself? You would say no. And whereas now Bhaviveka, who is a propounder or the founder of Savattantrika Madhyamaka philosophy, sub-school of Madhyamaka philosophy, he says that when we talk about rebirth, what goes from one life to the next and so forth is consciousness. And therefore, because the consciousness goes from one life to the next, he says that we assert that the consciousness is the identity, the final identity of an individual, a person. And within this, what you understand here is that this comes from a concept or an idea that if something exists, it must have some objective existence, an objective entity or an identity. And therefore he says that from amongst all the aggregates, the Bhaviveka says the 6th consciousness. Of course, within consciousness there are the perception, the sensory perceptions, and then the mental ones, and within the mental also there are many different. And so he says the 6th consciousness, the primary mind consciousness is the identity of a person, the final identity of a person. And but if we, rather than that, if we could actually assert that the self or an I, that we all have a sense of I, and which is called, if we could say that this I or oneself is merely, is called designated by way of name, that would be called more convenient as assertion. And according to the Prasangika Madhyamakas, it said that things are merely nominal, merely in name. But when we say this, the term mere here, Tsongkhapa says, does not mean that does not reject that there is some object also, which is referred by the name. When we say mere name, it doesn't mean that there is no object, but it's just a name. And that's not the case. But there is an object. Yet, when we actually search for the object itself, you cannot actually find anything that you can point to as being that object objectively. And therefore, it is said that so it is with the consciousness as well. And so the consciousness is not at all this I. And although on the basis of this consciousness we can say, we can designate or name a person or and so forth, but the consciousness itself is not, doesn't have any objective existence to be the individual's final identity. And within the consciousness again, we can see there's a consciousness when we are in a waking state, and then dream state, and then deep sleep, and so on. And finally, when we die, what happens is we go through the process of dissolution of the different elements, called earth element into water, and so forth, and until even the grosser levels of consciousness dissolve into the final, called the subtlest mind, which is called the subtlest clear light. Even at that point, we cannot say the subtle clear light, the subtlest clear light is the person as such, because even at that point we can still say my clear light or that person's clear light and so forth. So it shows there's a relationship between the clear light and yourself, and the clear light is not you as such. And so and then, of course, when we talk about yourself, the I, we cannot really say the I sometimes is active and the sometimes is dormant and so forth. Whereas when it comes to consciousness, there are times when certain consciousness go dormant and others, like the subtlest clear light, becoming remaining dormant when we are in a waking state where we are not able to use it. Whereas you cannot talk about I being active or dormant at some point, but it's always there. And so what this shows is that I do exist, the self or yourself does exist, but then not objectively whatsoever. And then so with regard to this, what we are getting at is that the understanding of emptiness. So Master Tsongkhapa, in his treatise called Differentiation between the definitive and the interpretable teachings of the Buddha, he says that for those my friends who have studied the Madhyamaka texts, and even after doing such studies, you may still find it difficult for you to say that although things are empty of any intrinsic existence, yet there are causal and the law of causality still works. That may become difficult for you to assert, yet it would be better if you could rely on those statements from the Madhyamaka texts. And then in his and then in the so that was said in the great section of the great insight in Lamrim Chemo, and then in the section on insight in Lamrim, the intermediate Lamrim, Master Tsongkhapa says that to say that there's no other way than by default we have to say that things are designated by name, and then in and then in the commentary on the commentary on Mula Madhyamaka Karika, Master Tsongkhapa says that there are two ways in which things can exist. Since they cannot have any existence objectively, we are left with the other choice to say that they are merely called by name, and therefore we should be able to direct our mind to that understanding and push our mind towards that understanding. And then and then in the commentary to Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka Avatara, Master Tsongkhapa says that it is the most difficult part of the understanding the Prasangika Madhyamaka philosophy is to say that things are merely while saying that things are empty of any inherent existence, that they still do exist, but merely in name. And so these are many different kinds of understanding or explanations of the Madhyamaka philosophy, understanding of emptiness, and that things to say that things have do not have any objective existence, but merely in name. And then the seventh Dalai Lama has said. The Gongdang Tenpe Döme has also said that when it comes to understanding emptiness, you actually have to verify it from your experience. And of course, you can study all these different texts, having studied them, apply those teachings in meditation, and then through one's own meditation, using reasoning and applying those teachings within yourself, you'll see that when you realize emptiness, it is you come to a point where your mind just sees an absence of any objectification in anything, and there the mind is fixed on this called a negation, a mere absence of any true existence. And similarly, in the seventh Dalai Lama says that at the crossroad of these six perceptions, what you find is this the duality, which is actually devoid of any foundation, and therefore do not think that things have some true existence, but focus your mind on emptiness. And so with regard to this term called the foundation, devoid of any foundation or basis, and even in the Nyingma tradition, the Dodrup Jingme Tembe Nyingma has said that this term that is used in Nyingma also, Shime Tsatel, which means totally devoid of any basis, should, in order to understand it thoroughly, well and correctly, we have to resort to the classic texts written by great panditas and accomplished masters of India. And so this also gets at the same point of understanding emptiness correctly. And so when it comes to the Kagyu tradition also, of course, the Maharprabhu Lotsawa received his teachings on emptiness and so forth from Master Naropa, who must have studied the text written by Chandrakirti, therefore he must have followed the Prasangika Madhyamaka as well. And so his follower Milarepa also says that in the ultimate sense, even Buddhas do not exist, leave alone the obstacles.
풍부다민 들때민 달라때민 대매민 풍부매신 단리민 디지털 지들이었어. 단 남게르고들이 자시고 송샤디. 되네다 디다르자. 다 감디바 자연도 중숨 중주다 사다 추다 지금 메달롱사도 자이다 중주 차대 알아봤다. 다 디디 뒤처럼 두번 뒤니 온데 걸어봐. 다 디디 전 중어든 중주는 이수 체인도잖아요. 단 중어스도 참 쉽지도 봐. 다들 지금 독체 체하지 마도 신시시 사주 메롱스는 이해야 매베소지. 사도들이 중숨서면 딜라민 텔런디민 테테민 레정 디신 인데 칠 중원 남자 다신 준스 사주 메롱로는 레정 오니도 메스. 그때네 편주 다 지금 정도는 전에 편주 때는 자 샤하지 마도 매등에人我一对面康苏面吧人民精卫榜样苏面都开始苏面人民精卫榜样苏面呢说说让有没的其实对我教很多原的说说让有呢표시面吧没几面有的套的对吧的出的弄的杀铁心原的面的先大面其实就已苏面先让苏不等进中华的前面听不容啊面说说让有的呢其实不能偏水有我你原来偏水对马来西亚的시드분의 편수유 소소랑유 뭐임바 자다 시드 편수유 개드 소소랑메이 강는 찌들 하면은 마데바는 찍내메 제보 소소랑유면 소소랑면 중원은 소소랑제 갈아요 소소랑메 샤창메 천이단의 군수 샤사 천이단 다오나 에네 가서 우리 사시타와 에네 사 에네 가서 우리 벽에 사시세와 양식 요하시네 렌시셔서 생이도 와서 되게 마다 맞아배 지금 장수게 탄핵이 다 그게 낭처로 디가네 아니 샤샤시리스 생이다네 군수시 카도트를 잡아다 대달라야 춘디인 미전남시 수남다 머리라다 깨와다 제월라다 자와창 단다 견제 뒤다니 통다 링소 시자다 민다 미제 대신 노 디신호서 참말로 민대샤서 편주되는 루고르스 사도주다 매도로 링동차도 봄이다 개선이네 남시수 가버려 주시 투베송스다 타도나 남도가 딱섬지다 페이지 송이어서래 다 지중 고베 단다 멤버리 다 남시 때문에 타야와 군도다고 들라는 사도주다 매도는 롱긴 내통 줄마인스 디니 링도 통화도 차분 계단 메기장 디니 민도 수다자 머리번은 가고는 줄스 아다 내루서 롱을 디지 삼으로 봐 디지 봐 니야 매체 봐 가족 그래 통야 요마레스 강모 통신 남시로 먼저 좀 대군이 대시치는 남시로 친이 대단 가본 줄스 어다 따든세 동리가 나와라 봐 굶지된 쉬고이네 취재가 나와 잡아지도 봐 인수 다 주고서 대한 계속 두배 송샤들이 가서 던칼 춘신 땡보신 인랑스 예면 나무로 녀나가 잡아 멀리 높 사디 어다 리베 다 디도는 신내가 라주로 전다 야고 쉬우셔다 그냥 뒤면에 그냥 칼 강성기 상당히 연두배 동원이 된 거로 거로 차 때려배 니시로 거로 숙심을 내주잖아요 아니 가서 먼저 좀 대군이스 대군 먼저 나줄이야 전쟁원의 여번 시샤체는 아주 저배쳐지 샤요고로다 다 니들이 봐 인수 다 주고서 대시신은 남시수 친이 되던가 본줄 남시 매일 표시는 로션 되게 힘을 대다 지신 점제배 외단 때문에 생내 시 전에다 준비게 최신의 저배 나오디인 봐 최신 인수 봐 얘는 팀 주고서 예로 그래서 다 주고 미시변의 문수가 신이 되던 게 봐도 강성고 명예 대성금에 가란죠 최신 많이나 최신 다르잖아요 니야 매배이나 춘이 거의 다르잖아요 니야 말이 수중 단데 수중하고 명성실 나가야는 명성 모스 수제 토리 디 명성인도 토리 자성게 나가야 명성です수속이 중dur그 최디게디 중어로 때는 연구가 있잖아요 두숙둔 중어매바 될 때문에 중주 수도 갈아요 대다 지금 수도 지금 일단 뉴제도 되면 지금 현재 탐절로 그 명성지 이번 인도잖아요 명정고 명성 인도 될 딱에 명대에 명성을 했어 대신 명성 이제 메스 소던 두신 두제도 남신 중어도보다 다신 돈의 삼자대 지지컴주 다음에도 얼마지 장할래 뭐부터 와도 내버려고 때문에 리우드 당보 다들 하셔
83 through to the end of the text. So as the interpretations are done in Korean, Chinese, and in Tibetan and so forth, English and so forth, then you should take your tea, and His Holiness would like to start the ritual for the blessing of Avalokiteshvara. I'm sorry, I should give you the rest of the text teachings that were left earlier. And so when it comes to understanding emptiness, we have to understand that the emptiness itself is the mere absence of any intrinsic existence in things. So when you get, when you're through your training of mind and meditation, and when you get that emptiness, your mind is focused on this absence, mere absence of any intrinsic, independent existence in things and whatsoever. You are not thinking about anything else but that, and that is called a negation. The object that it is focused on is a negation or negative phenomena, as it's called. And then the fifth Dalai Lama has said that with regard to the Yellowhead sect, followers of the Yellowhead sect, that there are many who are not really interested in, who lack any interest in, understanding the real treasure of the teaching of Master Tsongkhapa. And therefore, they remain. There are many who are always they remained empty-handed with regards to this treasure that should be actually obtained. And then Jangyo Rebbe Dorje has said that similarly, he has criticized the followers of Gelug tradition. When they talk about emptiness, they say, they are talking about rejecting or then called refuting any kind of existence or the object of negation and so forth. But they're not really. They're only using words and not really getting at the point, hitting home to that emptiness at all. And therefore, what we must understand is that we need to, in order to understand and get this insight into emptiness, we need to study a lot and then also use those reasonings to gain a better understanding of emptiness. And then finally, once you have ascertained it, they affect your mind in meditation and familiarize your mind more and more, so that you become closer to that emptiness. And once you get that understanding, it has to come from your own experience, and therefore and you have to be able to ascertain it from your experience. And therefore in the verse number 80 it is said that a person is neither these six constituents, and what else is a person if it's not the case. And then the in the Madhyamaka Avatara of Chandrakirti says that when he uses the sevenfold reasoning to establish emptiness, he says that when you do not do any kind of analysis, when you analyze a person through these sevenfold reasonings, then you will not be able to find any person as such within the aggregates or outside of aggregates and so forth, but the person is merely designated by name. And then therefore on the basis of the six constituent factors, earth, water, wind, space, fire, consciousness, and on the basis of these, we should know that a person is designated, and therefore a person cannot be be found other than merely being merely being designated. And therefore the absence of any intrinsic or independent existence of a person apart from this designation is the selflessness of persons. And then the verse number 81 shows the selflessness of phenomena, and it's very important to understand that. And then verse number 83 shows that these different elements of waters, earth, water, and so forth, are the gross elements, whereas when they are still made up of subtler elements of water, which in a sense we may not be able to make any distinction with our direct sensory perceptions or anything, but they have to be understood. These the differences between these six different the elements, or the fire, water, and so forth, only on the basis of isolates, as distinction should be made conceptually and not perceptually. And then verse number 90, with regard to verse number 90, His Holiness just read through these verses, and then when it comes to saying in line 4, in verse number 90, it says their characteristics are only termed conventional. And so His Holiness is actually saying he's waking up those who are falling asleep with these needs. And verse number 90, these characteristics are only in conventional, and termed conventional means that we should be able to, while saying that things have no independent and objective existence, yet they are posited by way of conventional terms, means that when we do not do any kind of analysis, we can talk about me, this, that, and so forth. And so that's what it means. And then verse number 93, in verse number 93, there is this term, and merits and everything else cease in consciousness, the sage says. So that doesn't imply that there's nothing external to mind, as Chittamatras say. And therefore, when it comes to understanding emptiness, we have to actually, that has to come through familiarization of your mind. And when the mind is familiarized more and more with it, then when you will be able to experience this emptiness and from one's own experience, where you see the mere absence of any objective independent existence in things. And then verse number 90, in relation to verse number 98, His Holiness says, where it says, whatever through ignorance is earlier misconstrued will be later ascertained. When a thing cannot be found, how can there be a non-thing? And so with regard to this, the seventh Dalai Lama also has said that just as the clouds in the autumn space dissipates in the autumn space, likewise all these different experiences that we have kind of dissolve within this nature of the mind. the non-dual understanding of mind.
다 오직 이름뿐이다라고 얘기를 합니다. 그래서 원소가 없는데 세계가 어디 있는가? 고로 오직 이름.
And then verse number 99 says, just as a physical form a mere designation, so too is space mere designation. Without elements, how can there be form? So is the case with name itself. And so when we talk about some things like physical forms and so forth, of course those are made up of subtler elements. And if these subtler elements, as it was analyzed earlier, cannot be really found objectively existent, how can the form and so forth also be found objectively? And then the So we may be able to continue with this text in the next years, and although you have received a commentary or explanation of only the first chapter, you can read the rest of the chapters in this text. There are 4 more chapters. You can study them, read them.
Oh yeah. That's enough. 다 가사는 게 좋아. 심주기 컴퓨테이션 무사 가서 여대봤다 데이터 아니 심딩이 처음디디 그 머리벌 땡땡이 집에 이두잖아. 미시별로지는 그 남짓이야. 시별로 되게 딩간다 처리고 세워봤다. 저들이 이두잖아. 산이고 막 토야 여대봤디 다 도신들 상당나 여투야지도 와. 다 미시베 집지도 봐서나 다 시벌을 그게 집게 가다 미시베 집어도 세서나 시저리야가 누버 말한저 세리가 로티 땡라 랑 누버도 랑자서야 돼 버시 사도 조금 매비치 자 집지도 봐서나 유지야가 누버 여다 비두산에 시시시벌을 봐도 집에 시도 세서나 지대신이 최탐절로 그게 스트야지기 누버지 그다 랑자서야 돼 버치 그동안 다 드르르 가서라야기 또 구시더니 그 산제사 구시더니 그 산제 어디 아니 다 상하게 지 규리를 하서도 줘야지 산제 좀 된데 기 아니 지금 풍금 기지기 아니 다 남다 딘리기 아니 하에 나발 때인데야 다한테 금들 산지심된 대기 캠베연대 제외연대 누범 칠레연대 여버드즈제디 야 하이 나발마 샤테바지 다디 하이 나발을 샤야디 그 사태자 대 곰니 말아줘야 상담이나 양고 판도에 되듯이 용기여야 돼. 서든지 인도 산지기 제외연대디 신랑 나발을 샤와디 제네시 캠베 연된디 신랑 나발을 샤와디 자베양 칠레서 누베 연데 아니 신랑 나발을 샤테바디 아니 제단 투모원체는 아니 차도 야 지금 라미기 규지도 주세요 지금 가서 탁제 풍금 풍금 지지기 최대 자리 샤여바이나 롱금 남다 좀 칠레를 다시 해도 심거리 So that goes for the Genesis. That Genesis judici so non lata. The Genesis jigine go drudandi. Chaju datusin juya, Juju datusin juya, Nanjo datusin juya, Nanjo lami datusin juya che, young de doa. That kind of drubu sosu come the mabata, nubada, loida, chongman the Newton Kava. So that is under the Genesis Chashiva, Chejutaturi, Genesis Chashiva. That the under Rinjujasanari to the native society, Tata Mishkuni, Shivi, Machunjugan, Shivi, to the Lochudanre, Shivi. Any Genesis, Tasuma Yidu, Pages Hazurpen, Size Kashish, Chanyari, Chatusi. That did in Genesis. Chashivi in a jana, Nevalia, 아니 되긴 다기마 되기 때문에 저도 제네시 라마 거배왕게 제네시 시차 시바 지리하면 아니 둥기한다 디꾸당 요새 때래 아니 제네시 샤시바 주문을 요 사바체 제네 다데 아니 다 제네시 차시베 아니 칠로슈 삼베타네 담면데 수지직 투전들 당연히 직교게 비슷기로 또 식차삼 길모도 내다 님분이 붙었다야.
그래서
Blessing of Avalokiteshvara, forehand from Avalokiteshvara. First of all, I'd like to explain that we're talking in the teachings we find mention of the Tathagata Garbha or the Buddha nature, and although we have Buddha nature within ourselves, this Buddha nature is at this point kind of obscured or covered by our defilements, and therefore, when these defilements by applying through the antidotes are removed, then the Tathagata Garbha itself manifests for us. And so the mind that we have also, when it's at this point, it's covered by our ignorance and fundamental ignorance about true nature of things and so forth. But once this ignorance is removed, we still have that mind which has the nature of being cognitive and clear and or luminous. Since it is already there, I mean, this becomes more manifest and clear, and so that we see everything as it is. And it's kind of quite natural for this to happen when the covering of the ignorance is removed. And therefore, within the context of Tantra, what we do is we do meditation on emptiness and use all this potential that we have, so that when you become enlightened, you can also, as an individual, you can also appear in the form of different deities. So the same person can appear in different forms, in other words. And then also the qualities such as wisdom, compassion, power, and so forth also can appear in the form of deities. And therefore, once we become, in order to become enlightened, we need to do meditation on the deities. And so within the context of Tantra, and within that we also meditate on emptiness, from which arises the deity and so forth. And so having become enlightened, the Buddhas can manifest in the form of Avalokiteshvara, for example, who is the manifestation of the compassion of all Buddhas, and then Manjushri, the aspect of the wisdom, knowledge of the Buddhas, and then Vajrapani on the one hand as the manifestation of the power of Buddhas. And then within the context of the highest Yoga Tantra, it is also said that the wind element, the purified state of wind element, comes in the form of Tara, who is the carrier or who performs the enlightened activities of the Buddhas as well. And so here we are going to do the blessing of the Avalokiteshvara, and within which there are, of course, with regard to practice of Avalokiteshvara, there are Avalokiteshvara aspects, different aspects according to practices according to the four different sets of tantras, such as Charya Tantra, Kriya Tantra, Charya Tantra, Yoga Tantra, and Anuttara Yoga Tantra. These different forms or the practices according to these four sets of tantras come because of the difference in the mental capacities and of the different sentient beings, their mental dispositions and so forth, and also because of the power of their intellect as well. And so we have different forms of the same practices of the same deity as well. And so the particular Avalokiteshvara that we are going to do the blessing of comes within the Kriya Yoga Tantra, and I have which is the lowest tantra, and then this blessing I have received when I was young from my Guru Tata Rinpoche, and after having received this Tara,
따타 린포체로부터 10살 때 처음 이 법을 들었습니다. 그래서 이
and so when I received this blessing from Tata Rinpoche when I was around 10, and then having received this, since then I may have recited few millions of the mantra of Avalokiteshvara, and therefore today, since we are going to do this blessing of Avalokiteshvara, the four-handed Avalokiteshvara from the Kriya Tantra, earlier I have visualized and transformed myself into this deity Avalokiteshvara with four hands, and so accordingly you also, for this purpose of receiving this blessing, should meditate or visualize me in this form, and also in the altar also you should imagine Avalokiteshvara with her four hands, and this is a mandala offering for to request the blessing.
Lama Genesis say, and Dungi Genesis say, and the Tenganangalia, Sanjay Chumdende, any near session gather, any Pendru Chudun loss of way, any Jagari Pendru Champuti to Squanny Yudeva, any Perkanjing Jongayada, Shimuyu Lamati the year somewhere, and Tianzo Korea, Tetishin Chenny, any Muju Lamati the year somewhere chair, any Tetunlea, some done, Chachawa, Chacha year somewhere. Then any so the Luma is you going to subway gets a tea, any Cheval Ugu Sambachi. Just one. Chanzawa the church, and so on the bottle ranchings in the Tenzing Shawan the town. Or the Jiggy, Simjala Jig, Seve, Riki, Kanda Jiggy, Luma Yusung Chacha, someone, but Ningu repeating, give a check, Shawache, church, Shawada. Then, dinner should be the outside of the Digi, when a Tambush to Toki, Paduya in the Thomas Palaya. Tuji tea simple guane, and the Jabal Zashava, Tarangos over Santia Nature, Droyatum, Bushing Zayaji, Teddy Zavala Jesu Yerache, Nona Chanju Samlia, Jesu Yerache. And Chanju Samui, the Geta, Casuri, Trodella, Donito, share of the Cashum Shuchavi, certainly in the Zane, where Chidawa the Chinibeta, got a yonder to Talia, and where Casuri, Jesu Yerache. Chanzawa Jesu, Guishis in Chongo, and in the young element was so at the Chongo Gu turned down Momardi, Pejaote, and jumped in the tea in the castle me Chinju, Kevin Shungdi, Manzo Davayina, and Chongo Guri. The best matter said Chongo Coronas, the just give it to Hane. Certainly, another so special there. That in the Gonadang, Karangi in the Sungshebe, Vegeti, Tanga Kutapata, the Yin Sakache. Chongo, and young element of saw at the ya. And then more. Or the sound, sick them watch it, yeah.
And so, with regard to this blessing, we'll go through the 7 branch practice. So, in order to do this, we'll not use the words as the text says, the words that are found in the Samantabhadra prayer, but imagine me as the Lama who's giving this initiation, this blessing in the form of Chandra with 4 hands, and also in the altar in front, which is prepared for this particular ceremony. Imagine Avalokiteshvara with 4 hands there, and then also imagine the mandala of Avalokiteshvara surrounded by the 17 Nalanda masters and the great masters and Panditas of India, as well as the Tibetan lineage masters of Tibet, And then the lineage masters of this particular called blessing of India, and then surrounded by the 17 Nalanda masters, and then the lineage masters of Tibet, and then also you can imagine lineage masters of the Dharma that has spread in Korea. And then with this visualization, you make your prostrations with your body, speech, and mind, and also make offering of all the virtues that you have collected through body, speech, and mind, and then also confess whatever negative actions you have done, wrongdoings that you have done through your selfish attitude, and then also rejoice in the great deeds and merits of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and particularly you can also rejoice in bodhicitta, and also the understanding of a view of emptiness, which must complement bodhicitta in order for us to reach the state of Avalokiteshvara and enlightenment. And then also make your entreatment to teach the teaching, to give the teaching to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Of course, when we make this request, we should also understand that if we study the texts and these great scriptures taught by the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas, the great masters, we are actually doing making sense of this request, and therefore resolve yourself to study these scriptures as well, and then request them not to pass away, and then dedicate the merits. So let us do the Buddhist prayer for generation of bodhicitta. Kneel on your right knee, please, and we'll do these lines. For bodhicitta, not bodhisattva vows, but bodhicitta, this altruistic intention to become a fully enlightened person, a Buddha, for the benefit of all sentient beings.
지금 존자님께서 하시면 여러분들께서는 이제 그 한국어를 마음속으로 생각하시고.
So there's lines that you are going to recite. His Holiness will say in Tibetan, but recite is: with the wish to free all sentient beings, I shall always go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until I reach full enlightenment. Enthused by wisdom and compassion, today in the Buddha's presence, I generate the mind for full awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings. With a wish to free all beings, please repeat it again. I shall always go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha until I reach full enlightenment, enthused by wisdom and compassion. Today, in the Buddha's presence, I generate the mind for full awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings. So at the end of this third repetition now, when you say for the benefit of all sentient beings, so you should think that having found this kind of human life now and met with the Buddha Dharma, I will follow. And so, with regard to at the end of this third repetition, when you say for the benefit of all sentient beings, imagine that you will actually make this strong resolve that you will be a serious follower of the Buddha's teaching, and as human being, as having found this human life and also met with the Buddha, that you will make it a meaningful life to attain called enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And so you should not feel discouraged saying that, of course, the Buddhas and the Naga masters like Nagarjuna and so forth were able to do those. They are special, but I cannot. You should not have that kind of low spirit, but think that the Buddha himself in the beginning was like us, and sentient, ordinary sentient being, but because he had the Sugata-garpa, the Buddha nature in himself, which he used and then journeyed along the path to enlightenment, finally he became enlightened. And likewise, we also have that Buddha nature within ourselves, and if with that we should be able to use this Buddha nature and train our mind to become enlightened. And so they make this resolve to be a serious follower of the Buddha.
부처님께서 하신 것처럼 우리도 붓다가 될 수 있는 그러한 조건들을 모두 우리가 갖추고 있고 또한 우리에게 지금의 기회가 있습니다. 그렇기 때문에 내가 부처님과 마찬가지로 부처님의 하신 대로 그대로 부처님의 바른 제자로서 열심히 하겠다라는 그런 마음을 내십시오.
다 심계바 정도 심계베 다 심계 탐치샤 아니 탐치샤바 정도 마세베 땅에 눈이 좀 된데다 에는 루루야 서서 때도 에는 자바 지든 자바 나신지기 다 다게 장 저주셔도 심계네 쥐바 타다로 출신도 로 삼버시 쉐베이나 에는 저주스메 동바 기그리 다양 더그지 닝도 매나 에는 심계바 sam마도 동바 렌드고 삼로케 뭐제 다 두신다.
So at the end of this third repetition, if you make this resolve that just as the Buddha and the Nagarjuna and so forth, these great masters that I've imagined, that I visualize in front of me here, have really engaged in the Bodhisattva deeds and then become enlightened, likewise I will generate bodhicitta within myself, and not only stay there, but then I will engage in all the practices of Bodhisattva. And therefore repeat this line, and you make this pledge to engage in the Bodhisattva practices as well. Then you will receive the Bodhisattva vow here at the end of this third repetition. Whereas if you feel that at this point maybe I will not be able to take Bodhisattva vows as such, make such a pledge, but then I will just generate bodhicitta. You feel convinced that at the end of this you generate this bodhicitta. With a wish to free all sentient beings, I shall always go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha until I reach full enlightenment. Enthused by wisdom and compassion, today in the Buddha's presence, I generate mind for full awakening for the benefit of all sentient beings. Now to repeat this, as long as space remain.
뒷페이지 168페이지 164페이지 바로 뒷페이지 맨 마지막에 있습니다. 지시남카네바다랑 3번
Repeat this, please. As long as space remains, as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain and dispel the miseries of the world. Please sit down. So Master Shantideva in his Bodhisattvacharya Avatara, the way of the Bodhisattvas, says that therefore which intelligent person would feel despair when thinking of riding the horse of bodhicitta, which leads one from bliss to bliss or happy state of happiness to happiness.
Lama 공부들 성도가 전주심 이렇게 믿기다. 저 지스 전주심식 주만수지 기배인의 소장 코란 것서 딕딕장 코란 것 정성도가 뜻된 말다. 내가 군대도야 대인주 터도 군대도야 대인주 친한 거 발제 대세. 다 직접 군주셔. 애는 전주심 그 간에 레제비서디 동닉 다와들이 잠깐만 장주 섬기다 섬듯이 얘네 동닉이 따에 지금 차단으로 소위 녀모디들라 곱자시 닝지도 참말로 소비들라 깜겨져지 노되기도
예. 그래서 이전에 스승들은
So our past masters have said that we should really put effort as much as we can to see that if we can to be able to do our best to cultivate and generate bodhicitta within ourselves, because once you have bodhicitta, that itself will help us to cultivate, to accrue a huge amount of merit, and that in turn also that itself will help us to purify our negativities as well. And therefore both the short-term and the long-term benefits, as well as avoiding or overcoming all kinds of external, internal or secret obstacles will be overcome by this bodhicitta. So it is like the one thing which can serve all purpose. And therefore, as a support to that, we should also develop the understanding and the view of emptiness. There is insight into emptiness, because this one helps us to overcome the negativities, the ignorance and so forth, and to overcome these negative emotions, and so that we can actually combine these two together to reach the goal of enlightenment.
다 딕심지도 좋지. 다 디주고 다 딘다. 균샤량 숨차지 좋지. 다 되네. 숨바가 동장체, 동방아의 로마남. 다 진지기도 되잖아. 로마남지 땅에 두성. 땅에 안다. 되게 안다. 진짜 재만하고 소원은 지체네. 아니 기부서민 충분히 매매는 나가면서 다 사무스톤 직관다. 가마 직시 또 사무스톤 당 나서야 가와도가 사무스톤다. 휴주 가마 직 고마.
So as it is said in the verse number 80 in the precious Garland, where it says, if a person is neither earth nor water, nor wind nor space, nor fire, nor consciousness, nor all of these, what else then is a person? And think along these lines and meditate on selflessness or emptiness for a while. So just check who you are. Where is this I, which you hold so dear? Where is the Korean I?
뭐야? 다 산지쯤 된데 나한테 가도가. 상동시.
Reflect where what is that I of the Buddha, and also the Avalokiteshvara's I, what is it? Just reflect on that as well. Just as we cannot find our own self when we think within our body and the mind, likewise, you cannot find the self or I of the Avalokiteshvara and Buddha as well. You cannot find yourself when you search for yourself or I. Likewise, Avalokiteshvara also cannot be found within his aggregates. And therefore, within this empty nature of being devoid of any intrinsic I, we are of same taste.
rang rengxin kempe kwane ene doso samalo ribe ba ta ne sanje ro ta ma rang zo ta na xin so so semji chuni di mo sha ba chane ene de ga na lo ba kumji shuk che da na chimbe ina ene doso go de kale ba nga ni shu ta de nga ran zo semdi na ba tamchi chimbe yi sa de cha de ya ji cha yo.
So just as the Buddha himself became aware of his own true nature, and then journeyed on the path and gradually overcame all kinds of conceptualization within himself, and when all conceptualization and all defilements have ceased within him, then he became a Buddha. Likewise, we also will be able to do that by realizing our own nature and finally reach the omniscient state.
Genesis tu samstung zane nyame mabsto gata ta tindri roloti molia and phungso nawati garu.
So when we check within ourselves, we will not find ourselves within the aggregates, and similarly it is the case with the Buddha and Avalokiteshvara. And so when we are not able to find anything that we can pinpoint as being Avalokiteshvara and so forth, what we get at is that there is this emptiness and the appearance of the body and mind and so forth. These will stop.
타메버스에 여대가 되게 인기 유들이야. 아니 알렌다에 긴고 시가를 참아. 드리송동. 텔레 대외에서 류탐자강 류탐자강데 다人间是就不没人着养了人给人给유들이야. 왕 토바지나人间是아니 봐.没Genesis kuruki. Wang toba jibayina ninge utegala Genesis shiji cha shiroji paseta.
And so here, from within this, when we do this meditation on emptiness, feel that when the mind is absorbed in emptiness, all the rest of the things that usually appear to our mind kind of go out of perception, and you are left with emptiness, this absence of any true existence alone. And now meditate on that, and from within that emptiness, and now those of you who have received initiations, complete full-fledged initiations before, imagine that you transform into an R syllable, and from there comes a moon disk, and on the top of that you arise into a Shri, and then that Shri syllable dissolves, arises in the form of Avalokiteshvara. But those of you who have not received initiations, imagine that Shri at your heart.
양을 rangi ningal Genesis tindichi komni da tinige da de ini kanda ini uzuluya riza eba megi sambashe da de 가서를 배 꿀래 ini wesi so pe sibusum pa kyoyachi pa wesi treni ini sibusum yebe ini 동네기 가서 대화 퐁 동네기 나네 여대봐 ini 대원도 동해면도 대단나야 동해진나는 여대봐 디지털 파 wesi treni ini 그 강력 강성 같다 판도로 집에 자단 제 신부지 samdong.
And so whether you have imagined yourself transforming into Avalokiteshvara at this point, or you have imagined the free syllable in the center of your heart, whichever visualization you have done according to whether you have received the initiation, full-fledged initiations before or not, imagine on your head, a crown of your head, Amitabha Buddha sitting. And from the Amitabha Buddha, you imagine rays of light go out. He radiates light everywhere into the three realms of existence, three planes of existence, and these rays of light help sentient beings overcome, dispel their suffering, and bring them happiness. So how many of you have received full-fledged initiations before? Please raise your hands. So you may, those of you who have received initiations before, you may imagine yourself transforming into Avalokiteshvara. The rest of you may imagine free syllable at your heart. Free syllable. So here now, having transformed into Avalokiteshvara, whether you are male or female doesn't really, it's not relevant, because you have earlier, when you did meditation on emptiness, you have dissolved all impure perceptions and impurities within that emptiness, and then you have transformed into Avalokiteshvara. And so when we did this meditation of transforming into Avalokiteshvara, for example, what you have done is, what this is called is that this perceived object of emptiness arising into a deity, which means that you have, in your mind, you have ascertained the emptiness, and then from within that meditation, you have arisen into a deity. And so it's called the arisal into a deity, this perceived object of the realization of emptiness arising into Avalokiteshvara, a deity. And so when your mind is full, the meditation on emptiness itself helps as it gets deeper and deeper. As your experience of emptiness gets deeper and deeper, you are said to accumulate more and more wisdom, or the wisdom kind of is developed further and further. And when you visualize yourself as a deity, and with all the enlightened attributes, then that is the for accumulation of merit. So if you have imagined yourself transforming into a deity, Avalokiteshvara, imagine in your heart a moon disk, and then on the top of the moon disk, in the center of the moon disk, imagine a free syllable, which is white in color, a free syllable. And if you have imagined not yourself transforming into a deity, Avalokiteshvara, but Avalokiteshvara is in your heart, then you can imagine this free syllable at the center of the Avalokiteshvara's heart.
Lama say, any Casa Jodi, any Yingale, the Page Lama than Dunji, Mo Yeme Samdan Yagotoga, Guebewangi, Lama than Dunji, Mo Yeme to Samdan, Hachika Samdan, Di Tugalia, Dating the Shi Karoya Samdan, Di Talia, in Omani Bemus and Angot She, that dinner, any Omani Bemus, Gendu Chevekulia, Gendu Tambukula, Nandri, and Lame Shana Marjun, Lamatan Dunji Yemik, the Shana Marjun, the Channel Lamanunji, any Ninge, she, 탈이야 당북 니베 예매도체 순배 땜벌제디 아니 송아 이주고 진로 멀리고 토송냐 봐체 송아 이주고 진로 뭐도 가져서는 답에 현지에 장주고 셈을 싸바상 것들이 도신다.
예. 그래서 그 다음에는 이제 그 앞에 계시는 그 사수관은
Now imagine at my heart, at the heart of the Chenrezig in front, in the altar that has been prepared for this ceremony, and as well as at the heart of the Guru, who is, in other words, not indivisible or not different from the deity in front in the altar. Imagine in our hearts the Om Mani Padme Hum around the three syllable at our heart, and then when you repeat this Om Mani Padme Hum mantra, the 6-syllable mantra of Avalokiteshvara, you will repeat it 3 times. So during the first repetition, imagine that this chain of this mantra comes out of my mouth. I am being in the aspect of Chenrezig, and who's not different from the front-generated deity. Imagine this chain of mantra coming out of my mouth, up my heart and out of my mouth, and entering your mouth and going down at your heart, to your heart. So the first time you repeat it, the mantra is placed around the 3 syllable at your heart, and then at the second time, the chains of mantra that comes out of me comes into you, and then they dissolve into the mantra at your heart, and at the third becomes indivisible, and then at the third point, my mantras dissolve into you. Please repeat Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum.
Oh yeah. 다 바보 전에서 투규기 아니 장주 무슨 돈이 있다. 되게 이 창도 라는 토소냐만 나셔. 다저 톱에 락지들라 다 뒤타는 소식이 아니 저주는 샹나 팬다. 계시 팬다 모토네 너가 지금에 삼바지 탐저샤. 두스나셔.
예. 이로 인해서 관세음보살께서 가지고
So the essence of the blessing of this mantra is bodhicitta. So you should make resolution that you will practice bodhicitta, and having received the blessing of Avalokiteshvara, what you have to do is that the essence of Avalokiteshvara is bodhicitta and the understanding of emptiness. And so you should also make a pledge that you will help other sentient beings as best you can, and even if you cannot help others, we will not harm others. So His Holiness is joking that the best blessing that you would have received from the 6-syllable mantra, Avalokiteshvara, is you, while having received this blessing, you can fight with others while reciting this mantra of Om Mani Padme Hum. That would be the best blessing. But that was just a joke, and from now on, make this resolution that you will not let yourself be taken away, swayed by any kind of negative thoughts. You go back after this teaching and went to your home country, and if people say to you that, oh, you have changed, you have become a better person, and of course that's what you need.
And part little robots, oh, made the tour 요하게 치면도 야는 도르신샤 야는 요하게 치면도 슬럼나 and 로선처럼도 그게 중요한 말이에요.
So if people tell you that that you have really not changed, you are the same person, or worst case, if you have become worse, then your coming here is a waste of money.
What are the she learns from gender Charles shoes? That's truth.
So the blessing is done with this.
이것으로 인해서 이제 결혼식이 모두 마쳤습니다.
아야. 다들 디시 취재될 때 아예 등도 당선 저우에 미스를 내고도 도에 어디만 넣으시더 있네. 등도 다선 저 미스를 되고도 드린 산재 써서 다주도 다는 다가 찐네 계속도 템벨해서 되면 쯤배진들과 욕을 면조 대달 차.
And so let us say this prayer from the Bodhisattva Charya Avatara. Today my life has borne fruit. Having well obtained this human existence, I am born into the family of Buddhas and now am one of the Buddha's children. Thus, whatever actions I do from now on must be in accord with the family tradition. Never shall I do anything to disgrace this holy, faultless family. Just like a blind... Okay.
Oh yeah, that's it. Because the in go chenyikita, Korea dujuzu. 아니 가져다 레퍼 심버리 아니 겨와도 모아줘래 엔다그래다 다 좋소 이나한다 바자 마직 쳐 근데 야주 양아주 고리에 장수들이야 무시적인 처지체는 이냐 좋아쇼.
So with this, the teaching for the Korean group this time is completed. And now we'll have a break here, and then the Koreans will gather into this hall again for the question and answer session and for the session with his holidays. So after the break, the others are not may not come, but the Koreans should gather. So we'll do the dedication prayer for our having dealt with the teaching and the teaching and the blessing. So Thanksgiving mandala.